Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us on this Facebook Live event entitled Your Local Dairy Farmers, a Sustainable Story. My name is Kate Fritz and I have the honor of serving as the CEO of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. And I'm joining you from Annapolis, Maryland today. We are so excited to be sharing this hour with you, with the American Dairy Association of the Northeast and our 3 Chesapeake Bay dairy farmers who we'll introduce in just a little bit. Thanks for joining us for a conversation with real dairy farmers doing real work to improve the water quality of their local rivers and streams in the Chesapeake. We had over 260 people express interest in joining this event today. So please use the chat to indicate where you're joining us from. This year, the Alliance is celebrating 50 years of restoring the Chesapeake Bay. In those 50 years, we have sought to bring together communities, companies, and conservationists to restore the lands and waters of the Chesapeake. In the last 5 decades, we have planted over 1 million trees. We've installed over $10 million of stormwater management practices in our urban and suburban landscapes. We've helped install over 764 acres of conservation practices on farms and helped train over 700 volunteer scientists to collect over 360,000 water quality data points from local rivers and streams. In our agriculture program, we focus on partnering with agro-businesses and farmers in order to help them access and leverage resources that helps our farming communities enhance planning efforts and to implement agricultural best management practices across their productive lands. In the last 4 years, the Alliance has worked in partnership with Turkey Hill Dairy in Pennsylvania to help create financial incentives for over 150 farmers to participate in implementing on-the-ground practices to stabilize barnyards, install fencing to keep cows out of streams, and planted thousands of streamside trees or riparian buffers to help stabilize stream banks and reduce pollution coming from farmland. It's no secret that the Chesapeake Bay is ailing, with challenges from increasing precipitation and continued pressure from land development. We know that over 40% of the nitrogen pollution into the Chesapeake Bay is coming from agricultural lands from New York all the way down to Virginia. With over 18 million people who live, work, play, and eat in the Chesapeake, it is imperative that we seek to assist our local food producers in making improvements to their lands that will improve the water quality of our local streams that eventually run into the Chesapeake Bay. The Alliance believes that our local farmers are a big part of the solution for a cleaner Chesapeake Bay. The purpose of today's event is to connect you with 3 Chesapeake Bay farmers and the work they are doing at the local level to reduce erosion and pollutants from coming from their lands. We hope that today you will learn more about how farmers are part of the conservation solution for a cleaner Chesapeake Bay. The Alliance is incredibly grateful for the American Dairy Association of the Northeast and their partnership in the form of financial support and helping us elevate the stories of dairy farmers doing incredible things. For the last 5 years, ADA Northeast has brought farmers into the room with environmentalists during our annual Chesapeake Watershed Forum conference And we celebrated our successes together at our annual Taste of the Chesapeake fundraising event. Our partnership with ADA Northeast means that we can elevate the message around farming and conservation efforts so all residents of the Chesapeake can feel good about how their food is being produced. I'm especially grateful for Ron Arell, Director of Environmental Outreach and former Alliance staff member, who has worked hard to share the good work of dairy farmers and how much they care about their lands and waters. Ron is truly helping move the needle to prove that your milk truly does come from a good place. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ron to introduce our three incredible farmers joining us today from all over the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
Wow, thanks, Kate. And thanks to the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay for making this event happen. What a great opportunity for us and what a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. As Kate said, I'm with American Dairy Association Northeast. We represent the 10,000 dairy farm families in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Northern Virginia, so much of the Bay watershed. You know, only 2% of our population has direct experience on a farm of any kind. And that's part of what ADA Northeast works with. We work to connect the non-farming public to your local dairy farms. We help share the dairy farming story, whether that's through spotlighting farm families that have been working the same land for multiple generations, or explaining the nutritional value of dairy products like milk, cheese, butter, and ice cream, or like today, describing the environmental practices that dairy farmers use to make a more sustainable future. ADA Northeast is proud to have partnered with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay on many efforts over the last many years. Kate, her staff, and the Alliance's leadership understand that for the Chesapeake Bay to be vibrant, a vibrant, healthy ecosystem, everyone needs to be involved. And as Kate showed in her introduction, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay knows and appreciates the role that agriculture must play if bay restoration is to be a success. The image on your screen shows the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Many of you are familiar with this. It's a huge area covering parts of 6 states in Washington, D.C. We thought it would be fun today to visit with different farms throughout the watershed and hear from a few dairy farmers about what they do on their farms to help not just the Bay, but also their local streams and rivers. We'll start way up in the Bay's headwaters in New York, then head down the Susquehanna River into Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and then we'll finish up in central Maryland. Before visiting the farms, let's meet the farmers. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'd like to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your farm. Let's start with Mike McMahon. And Mike, I think you're muted.
I'm going to get a t-shirt that says that. Thank you for that, for the introduction. So McMahon's Easy Acres, we're my son would be the 6th generation of McMahon's to milk cows in Cortland County. And so we're a 900 cow dairy with about 800 head of young stock in, as you can see, in one of the northernmost locations of the Chesapeake Bay. And we're in kind of a precarious environmental situation in that 70% of our farm is in the Bay watershed, and 30% is in one of the Finger Lakes watersheds, actually Skaneateles Lake, which provides unfiltered drinking water to the city of Syracuse. So there's 240,000 people there. The farm is also located over a sole source aquifer, which provides all the water to the town of Homer and city of Cortland. So another 25,000 people there, and 2 protected trout streams running through our farm as well. So we have many opportunities to make life miserable for a lot of people if we don't do things right and be good stewards of the land. So our crops are corn, alfalfa, and grass on our hills. We've made a lot of changes over the years to address things such as soil loss and like that by changing our cropping program. And we're fortunate and also unfortunate sometimes that we're only 27 miles from Cornell University. So we're always being tagged for new ideas and some experimentation. So we have been a case study farm with Cornell University since 1997 in matters of environmental issues. So I guess that's about it for our farm.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And thanks again for joining us. So let's head down south a little bit and stop off at Worth the Wait Farms and meet Laura and Chris Landis.
Hi, I am Laura.
And
my
I'm
husband,
Chris.
Go ahead.
We're a first generation dairy farm on land that's been farmed by my family for 6 generations. It was originally deeded from William Penn in the early 1700s.
Chris started the farm with a dairy herd of 44 milking cows in 2010. And then in 2014, we also added 2 broiler houses with chickens. So
We're part of the Middle Creek watershed, which is our local watershed, which is a tributary to the Susquehanna, and that is how our impact is tied to the bay. We're a traditional row crop farm for the most part. We farm corn, soybeans, and some alfalfa on double crops. Get into a little later in some detail.
Great. Thank you very much and welcome. And we look forward to seeing more about your farm in a few minutes. And finally, continuing downstream, let's stop off at Cow Comfort Inn Dairy in Union Bridge, Maryland with Katie Dotterer-Pyle.
Yes, hello, my name is Katie. My husband David and I were previous 3rd generation farmers, but we got a crazy idea, kind of like Laura and Chris, to start our own dairy. So we went from being 3rd generation to 1st generation. So we started with 90 cows, actually in Virginia, moved around a bunch until we found a place here in Maryland. So we are currently milking about 420 cows twice a day, but total herd size, and it's not all in one location, but we have 800 because you need the younger animals to replace the older animals. So yeah, our farm name is Cow Comfort Inn Dairy, and our tagline is where cows enjoy their stay. We are in the, we have actually a small creek that runs below our farm that then flows into the Monocacy River, then goes into the Potomac River, and then eventually ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. So we are very close to the Chesapeake Bay. We're only about 60 minutes from Baltimore, and depending on traffic, we're actually only 65 miles from DC. So we've done a lot of work in the last few years that I'm excited to talk to you about how we're helping protect the Bay. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And thanks again, everyone. This is a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about dairy farming and its connection to water quality. So we'll spend some more time with each of our farmers in a few minutes, but next let's spend some time getting to know the individual farmers and their separate dairy operations. The way we'll do this is each farm visit will feature a short video about the farm, and then we'll bring the farmer back, have a few more words with that farmer. And then at the conclusion of all 3 farm visits, we'll bring our panel back as a group, and we'll have a question and answer session featuring questions that are submitted by all you folks joining us live today. So if that sounds good to you, let's start at the top of the headwaters. Let's go to get to know Mike McMahon, Easy Acres in Homer, New York.
I'm Mike McMahon, one of the senior partners at Easy Acres LLC. In 1995, we built this complex. We began hearing, oh man, that big barn, they're probably going to put thousands of cows in there and they're going to pollute the environment. It was out there, and we heard it. And so we thought, we're going to have to make an extra effort to make sure that the people in our township are not going to be concerned about that, and that we will be known as good stewards, because we sit over the sole source aquifer for the village of Homer and part of the city of Cortland. And we also have Factory Brook, which is a AA trout stream, runs about 5 miles down through our land. So we began a well sampling and stream sampling project in the year after we built this operation in 1996. So we've been doing that for 21 years now. So those samples are sent to an independent lab, and we're getting them analyzed for nitrogen and nitrates, phosphorus. Okay, so we do that just to monitor our agronomic practices, and are we impacting the water, and if so, what should we do to change it? Also, over the years, we've selected different sections of these trout streams and had the 4-H teen council kids under the tutelage of someone from the DEC plant willow bushes on both sides of the trout stream for the sake of preventing stream bank erosion as well as keeping the water cool for the good of the wildlife in that water. So you're feeding the cow 115 pounds of feed a day. She's drinking 40 gallons of water. She's producing 90 pounds of milk, and 150 pounds of manure go out the other end. And so we set out to build a manure storage. So we had this storage all designed for 3.5 million gallons, and it was all concrete, and it was going to cost us about $350,000, somewhere around there. When we were meeting with the coordinated review committee, it came up that we have some concerns about cracking. So at that point, talking with our engineer and our builder, we found that there was this company out in the Pacific Northwest where they used PVC forms. The concrete was poured in the center, and this form would become watertight. So we said, well, that would solve that problem. It also added about $110,000 to the bill to build this structures. But then they said, well, what about the floor? The floor is all concrete. At that point, our engineer suggested we do a landfill liner underneath the concrete. And while we're doing that, let's lay in some tile lines to be able to monitor if there is a leak. We have 3 monitoring wells that these tile lines feed to, so we know which third of the structure could possibly have effluent in it. That added close to another, it's like 80 or 90,000 more to the cost of the project to do that. And all of a sudden we're hearing, oh, hold it. What if one of your hired help or something drives a tractor into this 16-foot tall structure with 3.5 million gallons in and breaks it open? It can flow down to the trout stream and everything's a mess. What are you going to do? The final answer was build this thing in the ground instead of above the ground. And so this is the first octiform structure ever to be built in the ground. So the end result was the safest manure system in the world. But the price at that point, by the time we got done with everything, had gone to $760,000 to store manure. So the Taj Mahal of manure systems. So today we're at one of our fields on one of our many farms that we own, and as you can see in the background, they're harvesting corn silage. The manure from the cows is nutrients that are used to feed the corn like we see here, and then when the corn is harvested, those nutrients are uptaken by the growing needs of the corn, and then we put the corn in, you chop the corn and put it into storage, and then feed it back to the cows, and the cycle is completed. And then after they eat, they make the manure, goes back on the ground. So it is a cycle of nutrients in a well-run farming operation. It's important to us to preserve this environment because we make our living off of a healthy environment. So it does us no good turn to abuse it. And if I want my son to be successful in this business, and God willing, his son after him, then we need to be able to hand on to the next generation an environment at least as healthy as the way we found it.
Thanks, Mike, that's a great introduction to your farm. I haven't been there yet, but it's certainly on my list. So in your introduction, you mentioned, that your farm is split amongst 2 watersheds, and one is the Skinny Atlas, which supplies the water to the city of Syracuse, New York, and that's in your backyard. Tell me a little bit about how you make decisions on your farm that are related to the Chesapeake Bay, which is, hundreds of miles from your farm. Does that come into play when you decide how you're going to operate?
Ultimately, it does, Ron. I mean, certainly our first concern is the neighborhood around us and all the private wells and public wells as well that we could impact. But having been involved in the AEM program from the very beginning, that's New York State's Ag Environmental Management Program, we just felt that it was obvious that there was issues with the Chesapeake Bay, and let's face it, the Susquehanna, I believe, supplies half the water to that bay. And although we are like you say, 250 miles north of there, and this was where it starts. So you got to do things right from the very beginning, and it has, I think, through my involvement with the Soil and Water Conservation District, and with with the AEM program, we've always been aware of that. We do have an impact further down, but first and foremost, of course, is we don't want to cause problems for the nearby neighbors, so we do the best we can. It was the reason that we began our well and stream monitoring project, where we take samples every 3 months from 5 different wells, the 5th one being the municipal well itself, and then the stream flowing to the north to the Finger Lakes, and then also Factory Brook, which is our stream that flows to the Tioughnioga, and from there to the Susquehanna. So is the bay right there in front of us all the time? I would have to say, ultimately it is, but we think of our neighbors and those downstream from us first, and do the best we can for them, which ultimately is the best for the bay.
Thinking locally, but acting bay-wide, right?
Yeah, I would say that's a good answer. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mike. We'll come back to Mike a little bit later in the program. And if you're just joining us live, we're visiting 3 dairy farms throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We just visited with Mike McMahon in Homer, New York. Let's leave New York for a moment and head down the Susquehanna River to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and where we'll meet Chris and Laura Landis and Worth the Wait Farms. We'll show a little video about them, and then we'll come back and talk to them.
Hi, I'm Chris Landis. Welcome to Worth the Wait Farms. We're a dairy and commercial poultry farm in northern Lancaster County. We're home to 44 milking cows, around 100 head of cattle, 60,000 chickens, and we encompass a little over 150 acres of farmland that was originally deeded to my family from William Penn in the early 1700s. Worth the Wait Farms is in the Middle Creek watershed, which then drains into the Conestoga, which flows down into Susquehanna and eventually ends up in the Chesapeake Bay.
Hi, I'm Laura Landis. My husband Chris and I own Worth the Wait Farms. I would say I'm most proud of our cover cropping and no-till. It allows us to not only have better quality feed for our cows, but more abundant feed for our cows with this smaller square footage of land. And it has improved the soil quality and even just better to look at. I mean, it's not all brown and muddy everywhere all year. It's definitely improved even just in the few years that we've been here. And it generates a lot of conversations with our neighbors of what are you doing and why? And oh, well, maybe I should try that too.
The first thing we did right out of the gates when I took over the operation in 2010 was implemented a no-till farming practice. We do very little, if any, tillage here. We rely on the plants to do that for us, our cover crops and things like that. There's no working of the ground, turning the ground over as it traditionally had been done. We drive the seed directly into the ground without turning it over. A specialized piece of equipment that does that, and that minimizes our chances for erosion. It minimizes our soil losses and allows us to get a crop established without having to disturb the organic matter, disturb the soil layers and things like that. Allows us to build organic matter in the soil to make for a healthier soil that requires less commercial fertilizer, use less diesel fuel because they're not running over the ground as often with their tractors, and there's not as many steps to getting a crop established. It's pretty much a win-win as far as I'm concerned. We use a cover crop system here, which means that when our planted, our main crop like corn, soybeans, things like that come off, when we use those to feed our animals, then we're left with a blank pallet again in the fall after harvest, at which point we plant what is referred to as a cover crop, which is usually a small grain. And what that does is that establishes a cover on the soil and puts a root base down into the soil to hold the soil over wintertime when we're not actively farming the soil. So that allows us to hold our soil and reduce erosion issues. It also establishes a filtration system of our soil. When we apply nutrients on top of the cover crop utilizes those nutrients and draws them into the plant itself rather than just having a nutrient that's sitting there waiting for our next crop year to start. We develop a sponge over our entire farm that just holds our nutrients here and doesn't allow them to run off, and ultimately allows us to provide for a cleaner watershed. We can't keep water from running off of our property. What we can do is we can keep that water from taking the things that we don't want to leave our property off of our farm.
My name is Jenna Mitchell, and I'm the Pennsylvania State Director at the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. The Alliance works throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed to restore the lands and waters that flow into the Chesapeake Bay, and we work with communities, conservationists, and companies to do that work. I think that unfortunately a lot of America doesn't quite understand the reality of farming, or they have different concepts of what's good farming and what's bad farming, and I think that the Landises, break those stereotypes and really show how good farming is and how smart you need to be in order to be a farmer. They're just the epitome of what I'd love America to learn about the reality of dairy farming.
Well, our land is our livelihood, so we take it very seriously to ensure that it is taken care of and that we are ensuring that it's here for future generations. If we don't take care of our land and don't ensure the conservation of our natural resources, we can't ensure that our future generations will be able to continue what we've been working so hard to establish here at Worth the Wait Farms.
So Laura, thank you for that wonderful video and sharing your farm and your story with us. I have a question for you both, if you want to indulge me a minute here. Working closely with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay to work on some improvements on your farm, and I know you've had other sources of funding and opportunities. Could you just describe that partnership and some of the work that you've been able to do on your farm?
Sure. We're members of Maryland Virginia Cooperative, which supplied Turkey Hill, which is how we got hooked up with the Alliance. And we worked with the Alliance to develop some improvements on our farm that were necessary, mainly in animal housing and ensuring that we can manage our nutrients, animal waste, specifically manure, in a sustainable manner, and ensure that we're able to implement best management practices in that management of those nutrients.
And I would say through that partnership, we've definitely had assistance with funding projects that needed to get done anyway, which has been an incredible blessing. And we've been quite honored to work with you guys. We enjoy what you guys do. We've tried to encourage some of our neighbors and friends when they hear about it. We're like, oh yeah, we like them. And actually, we recently learned that I believe you guys are also working with a company that we grow chickens for as well, because we were at a meeting there and they came up and we're like, yes, yeah, that's great. They're wonderful.
Yeah, and chickens are contributors also back to this dairy, and we're kind of a diversified operation here. So we hope that we can maybe be a liaison not only in the dairy industry but also in the poultry industry to help also with making improvements.
And we know that for us and many of our peers, one of the big inhibitors to a lot of changes and improvements is the financial side. So knowing that there are partners that are willing to work with us to make those improvements is very helpful, and it really encourages those conversations to keep going, because it provides opportunity to make things happen that really need to get done. So
that's great. The name of your farm is Worth the Wait, and I was just wondering, it seems like you two aren't ones to wait around, that you're ahead and doing things. But could you just quickly tell us how you came to the name of your farm?
I graduated from high school in 2006, and I wanted to farm right out of high school. There'd been about a 25-year lull, and a family member actually operating our farm. My uncle went out of business in the early 90s, and we were able to retain the land, but there was no generation that was interested in taking over the operation. So it was operated mainly as a rental property to other farmers. And then, like I said, in 2006, I graduated from high school, and I wanted to start farming right away. My mom and dad, who owned the farm, but neither of which had farmed as their career paths, decided that after seeing my uncles take the route that they did, that I needed to, I guess, grow up a little bit and get some experience and maybe mature a little bit before I was in a business that is as complex as agriculture. Most people, seem to think that farming is simple, and then we have this romanticized image of farming and an old McDonald type of thing, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. And so in 2010, after graduating from Delaware Valley College, came back, and that's where the Worth the Wait came from. We feel it was worth the wait, and we're back on land that has never left our family. I mean, we were here before the United States of America was the United States of America, and we hope to continue that.
Great. Well, thank you both. We're going to continue on our journey down south. We'll get back to you at the end with a few more questions. But I want to introduce our last farm. I have had the privilege of visiting the Cow Comfort Inn and meeting Katie in person in 2018 as part of one of our field trips for our Chesapeake Bay Watershed Forum. So we're going to show the video of the Cow Comfort Inn, and then we'll have a little conversation with Katie afterward.
My name is Katie Dotterer-Pyle, and I am co-owner with my husband David here at Cow Comfort Inn Dairy. We are located in Union Bridge, Maryland, which is about 20 minutes south of Gettysburg, right over the Pennsylvania border, and about 45 minutes from Baltimore. Our farm is located in the Little Pipe Creek watershed that then flows into the Monocacy River, that then flows into the Potomac River, and eventually ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. So we're not very far from the bay at all. Let's talk about manure. Manure is the best natural resource you can find on a farm. One, we always have a surplus of it. And two, it's a natural fertilizer. So we take a lot of our manure and we put it out in the fields to help our crops grow in order to be able to feed our cows all year long. And when we first moved here, there was just one manure pit that held 1 million gallons of manure. You might think that's a lot, but it's actually not for 400 cows in one facility. So we again worked with our local agencies to help put a plan together and get funding. Funding is really key for farmers, especially first generation farmers where we don't have a lot of money. And we were able to put in another pit, and this pit is 1.5 million gallons that it holds. And we were also able to put up a structure that holds solid manure. So you might wonder why we need all this storage room for all the manure. Why can't we just put it out in the fields all the time? Well, one, if I have crops growing, you don't want to run them over and having to fertilize that way. The biggest reason we have this is because in the state of Maryland, we cannot spread manure from November until March. We have a really big chunk of time there where we need to be able to hold manure somewhere. And the reason we can't spread manure in the wintertime is if you think about it, the ground freezes. And when the ground freezes, nothing can soak through. So it doesn't make sense to be able to go out and put manure on that ground if the ground is frozen. So during those winter months, we need to have ample storage space to be able to store all of this manure until that ground thaws and we're able to get back out there and fertilize the ground. When we spread manure, we do it many different ways. We can spread it with a manure spreader. We can drag line it, which saves on fuel. And we also have started implementing a new technology, which is injection, which we actually take an implement and it injects the manure into the soil. So it doesn't have a lot of odor. It's better for the soil because it's actually going into the soil a lot deeper than it would, say, if we were just covering on the top. And we also have a nutrient management plan, which is a plan that is put together where we worked with our state and county agencies to put together a plan to say, okay, you have this much manure, but this much acreage. How can you spread it? When can you spread it? And we follow that to a T. So once the cows come to the milking parlor, we go in and we scrape all their stalls, make sure all the manure is out of it, which we have alley scrapers, which we call squeegees, that clean the barn 24/7. So all that manure is getting scraped down so our cows remain clean. But then we can take that manure and we dry it out, which is really cool. It's like a corkscrew if you kind of think it that way. So it squeezes all the water out. The water then goes into our manure pits, which then goes out on the fields. But what we're left with, if you think about it, manure is really just digested food. So what we're left with is the fiber. And so once you dry that out, it makes a really fluffy, dry, consistent bedding that we are then able to put back in the beds for the cows. So it's a really cool cycle here. We are dairy farmers because we love to take care of our cows, because we love to take care of our land. We have actually found that working with the agencies here in the state have actually been very helpful in being able to fund things, funding our manure projects that we have going on here. Because as a first-generation farmer, we don't have the equity that multi-generational family farms have. We don't have a surplus of anything to help us do that. So as first-generation farmers, we are super thankful that we're able to work with these agencies in order to be able to put these projects in to help the environment, to make sure that this farm is here for years to come.
Katie, thanks for letting us visit for a little while there. I've been to your farm a few times, and I always kind of know where I am when I open that front door and see the almost Airbnb or hotel like welcome to the inn. So thanks for letting us visit with you today. You didn't mention this in the video, but you often use a catchphrase, ask a farmer, not Google, which definitely perks me up a little bit and makes me want to hear more. What do you mean by that?
So it's a catchphrase, and I also have made it into a very popular hashtag. Ask Farmers Not Google is just what it says. I got so sick of people going to other sources when they had questions about their food, when they have questions about farming. They go to, Dr. Oz, they go to the media. I know that we're less than 2% of the population, but we're here and we're more than willing to answer questions about what you have about, how cows are taken care of, about environmental issues. So ask a farmer, not Google. Google does not milk cows. They don't have experience with that. We do. So that's where that originated from.
And that's a good reminder for folks listening right now to type in your questions. You've got four farmers here. Representing 3 farms. If you have questions, any questions, go ahead and type them in.
A lot of us are on social media too. So, we're out there. Just look us up.
Perfect. So in your video, you talked about as a first generation farm and, capital is always an issue. You talked about working with different environmental agencies in your video, and it sounds like you've had good experiences. Tell us a little bit more about that. How does that come about? Do they reach out to you? Do you reach out to them? What's the process?
We usually reach out to them, and it actually stemmed from when we first moved to our farm. So we bought our farm 7 years ago, and we noticed right away there was a pit that was collecting. It actually wasn't even a pit. It was this old tote that was collecting the leachate, which is the juices that run off of corn silage when the corn silage is fermenting. And it's not obviously very good for anything. And so anyway, it was missing the tote completely. And we looked at this like, oh my gosh, this is such a disaster. So we were the first ones to call our local NRCS and say, hey, what do you have available? How can you guys help us? And so from then on out, for the last 7 years, they have been nothing but fantastic to work with. We put those 2 manure pits in that you saw, a solid manure building, because I think if more, I don't think some people realize that there's funding out there to help us. So, that's our biggest, and I think some other farmers had said that too. That's sometimes our biggest obstacle as farmers. We don't usually have any cash sitting on the side for anything. So to have help, to have aid, to be able to put these environmental things in to help is amazing. So we have a fantastic relationship with our local agencies.
Great. Thanks again. I think this would be a good time maybe to bring all of our farmers back up and Kate, and maybe we can have a little roundtable discussion. There they are.
Absolutely. And Ron, you had a good reminder to please type in any questions you have into Facebook. We'll be sure to ask our farmers directly. Katie had a good reminder, please ask your farmers, not just Google. So please add those to the chat. We'll be sure to get to those. So I want to throw out a general question here to all of our farmers on the webinar today. What makes you optimistic about the Chesapeake Bay recovery from your perspective? What makes you optimistic? Anyone's welcome to start that one.
I guess for me, one thing that I'm optimistic about is that there's, I guess historically speaking, it's as a farmers felt like the blame's always been pointed at us, and now there's becoming an increased understanding that it's everybody involved, is contributing, and there seems to be an increased, I guess, mutual agreement that if we're going to fix this problem, we all need to work together. We don't just need to point fingers at one industry or one individual or whatever it may be. That's one thing I'm seeing changing in the 10 years that I've been in business, and that really is, I guess, encouraging to help solve the problem.
Right. Mike or Katie, what makes you optimistic about the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay from your perspective?
Well, I think from my perspective, being considerably older than the other members on the panel today, we saw back in the 90s when Soil and Water Conservation District and NRCS were beginning to try to formulate the AEM program in New York State. And it's that program that got signed into law in 2000 that, and for those who don't know what the AEM program is, it's a 5-tier system where you begin by identifying or taking inventory of your farm and identifying where your environmental issues are. And then as the tiers come through and you work through them, the ultimate 5th tier is implementing the changes that you feel or that the agencies who you're working with feel could accomplish what we're after. And we've seen excellent results from that over the years in terms of the water quality leaving New York State as it's measured at the Susquehanna River. So that gives me optimism that up here in New York, where we seem to love winter, whether we do or not, I think it gives me hope that the Bay can recover.
Thank you, Mike. Katie, you have any thoughts on what makes you optimistic about the recovery of the Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah, well, like Chris was saying, it used to be the finger was always pointed at the farmer, and then it got to be the finger was now pointed at the big farmers. And my family farm milks a lot of cows in Central PA, and and I was actually in an ag leadership program in Maryland called Lead Maryland, and there too, it was like Maryland farmers are doing everything, but Pennsylvania is not. I'm like, hold up, no, that's not true. So I think the more of the awareness that it's not just the size of the farm that matters, and it's not just farms. I mean, everybody's contributing to it one way or another. So I think that I'm very optimistic because of the awareness that is getting out there. And also, like I said, there's funding available. There's we've building great relationships with our state and local agencies. I think that says a lot.
That's great. So I want to ask kind of the flip side of that question too. We're optimistic certainly about the future of the Bay, but we know that there's so many more challenges ahead of us. And you will certainly eat, live, and breathe your work on your land. Can you talk a little bit about what you think are some of the greatest challenges still ahead for the Chesapeake Bay? I don't know if we want to go in reverse order maybe this time. Katie, if you want to start.
The first thing that comes to my mind with challenges is making this more of an umbrella. How should I say this? I don't think it's fair that just like a set number of farms with, okay, you have 300 cows, right? Like, so if you're considered a CAFO, you have to have a nutrient management plan. Why not everybody have a nutrient management plan? I think that's more fair. I think that is a big challenge because again, I think there's still a stigma out there. We're like, oh, well, this farm, Amish or not Amish, they only have 30 cows. They're not, everybody is contributing. So I think that's still a challenge. And I still think it's a challenge too. Like, I think we're making headway between, like farmers and in the Chesapeake Bay Alliance Foundation. But I also think that we need to make more inroads with consumers that that still think that we're the big culprit of pollution.
Yeah, really good point. The consumers and some of the challenges around communicating information to them and educating our consumers. Mike, do you have any thoughts around some of the existing or persisting challenges?
I think in my mind, although I agree 100% with what Katie said, climate change, I'm very concerned about that. I've been around long enough to know that, for example, when I graduated from Cornell back in 1973, took over the corn planting on our farm, on our valley flats, which is our best ground, you could put a 90-day corn, and we plant corn by the days to maturity, because you knew that that would make it to full maturity before you had to harvest. Since a few years back, I turned that over to my son. This year, he'll be planting a 113-day maturity corn on the same ground that in 1973 you did well if you could bring a 90-day corn to full maturity. So anybody who wants to argue with me about climate change, I'm more than happy to stand toe to toe with them. But you know, when you look at the ferocity of the storms that we're dealing with now, it's a real challenge to keep your soil where it is, and you know, using things like no-till like that, as Chris and Laura spoke to, you know, that's how we're going to solve these problems.
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, the predictions for climate change in our part of the world here in the Chesapeake are that we'll have longer periods of drought and longer periods of intense rain. And so it's going to be, you know, kind of all and nothing scenarios. And that will certainly challenge this work and farming in general. Absolutely. Laura and Chris, do you have any thoughts around persistent challenges that you see ahead?
I would actually echo what both Katie and Mike said. I think those are both probably some of the biggest challenges, changes with the climate and how we're going to adapt to that and continue conservation practices with those changes, and technological changes that come with that. But also I agree that it's great we have fewer or more of a team effort, I would say, towards solving a lot of these issues than we've had previously, but I think that's still a really big hurdle. Groups like the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay are fantastic, and I love that it's common goal, but we can meet together. I feel a lot of times, even though we're all working towards the same goal of healthy environment, we get hung up on who needs to be doing what, and we're not making progress. And it's a lot of the finger pointing and the blame game, big farm, small farm, ag, non-ag. People like to throw politics into it and all of that. And we really all have the same end goal, but we get, I think, sometimes a little too loud trying to defend ourselves, that we're not focusing on how to compromise and find the best path forward. Funding is a huge inhibitor, kind of like Katie spoke to, which is where groups like the Alliance really come in, very helpful, and also communicating with consumers that we are doing our best with our resources. We're trying to implement best practices. And I mean, there's only 3 of us farms on here today, but that's kind of standard across the industry. It's really difficult to find farmers that aren't interested in the same things that we are for the same reasons. But I don't think that message really gets out as clearly or as often or as loudly as perhaps it should, that we do have the same goals in mind. We just have to have conversation, not arguments on how to achieve them.
A really good point. Sometimes our differences get in the way, and we don't realize how similar we truly are in the end. So really good point. Ron, do you want to jump in and ask a question of our esteemed panel?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. You know, kind of building on what's already been said, I kind of want to throw out at the panel the question, what motivates you to implement some of the practices that you described on the video, or, you know, others that you may not have mentioned? Is it from a productivity standpoint? Is it an environmental sustainability standpoint? Are there you mentioned that finances are a factor in giving you the ability to do it, but do these have financial rewards for you as well, implementing these types of practices? And since we left off with Laura and Chris, why don't we go back to you, and if you could start us off there.
Yeah.
It's a yes to all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I came back to our farm in 2010 and started our operation, it was operated like a traditional agricultural setting with tillage and things like that. You know, my grandfather at the time was in his mid to late 80s, and when I started no-tilling and not working ground, chisel plow and things like that, he told me one time that if I'd have done that, they'd run me out of town. And I said to him, you know, well, one of the worst reasons to do something is because we've always done it that way. And maybe it's time for some changes. I mean, you could see the effects that it had on our land, and after 6 heading in 7 generations of that, we needed to change, or it, regardless of what the bay was what impacts it had on the bay, we were not going to have ground ledge. And we have a sustainability mindset on things, and we needed to make some changes. And in 10 years, the rewards of those changes and the benefits we've seen, quite frankly, to our bottom line and also our environmental impacts are huge. And it just speaks volumes to how being conservation minded, can be a benefit to not only you, but also to our environment around us.
And we need to maintain that environment because, I mean, we have 3.5 kids, and we're probably going, hopefully, to have grandkids and great grandkids, and there needs to be something for them to live on and take care of, whether they're farming or not. We don't anticipate any or all of them staying here. We would love if they all did, but we don't expect them to. So they're going to be out in the world somewhere, and they need clean water and clear air, and they need to understand that you take care of what you have so you can hold on to it a little bit longer, because otherwise it won't be here, and then we have nothing.
And I've witnessed firsthand you teaching that ethic to your kids when you talk about the chores and their options to opt in or opt out of the chores.
Yes,
with different incentives. Great, thanks. Katie, let's go to you. What motivates you to implement some of the things that you described?
Definitely the environmental, it rewards for the environment, not just for us. Especially, when I talked about seeing that mess when we first moved here, because we want to be good stewards of the land. And we knew moving to Maryland that, one, the regulations were a lot more than Pennsylvania, and two, that we were super close to Chesapeake Bay. And we wanted to also, and I had the opportunity at those meetings, when people say, oh, it's farmers, I'm like, excuse me, this is what, we've done. There are some financial rewards. I mean, not really specifically for us. We've tried. I'm always try to be an out of the box thinker. I would love to take the manure that you saw that we dry for bedding. We've actually tried to pelletize it for a heating source. I'm still trying to think of different ideas. But just like Laura and Chris were talking about, future generations. We don't have children, my cows or my kids, but all of our land is in CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program. So no matter, we're more for mentoring the next generation out there that wants to farm. People like Chris that want to farm right out of high school. We take these young adults in and we mentor them, and so regardless if it's our own children or somebody else, we want this land to be around. And we always say we want to leave it better than we found it. So we're not only, going to take care of it, well, we're going to do what we can to make sure it's, it's even better. My family, for example, up in Central PA, they've been no-tilling since the 70s. And the third generation, my generation, is back there now starting to take ownership, and they're doing the same thing for the fourth generation. So I wouldn't say, I would love to, and there's programs out there to look at maybe some future financial rewards, because we all know we have an unlimited surplus of manure. So can we please find a way to capitalize on that, So we could be doing two things. We could be helping the environment, but also helping our bottom line out, which if you don't know, is usually, we've had more bad years than not in the dairy industry. So anything that would help so that, we don't have to have 5 jobs on the side would be great.
Mike, how about you? What motivates you way up there in New York?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say to Katie, get used to it. That seems to be dairying. Some days I wonder why we continue, but I guess this is where we were fortunate that we are this close to Cornell University, because as the case study farm, one of the professors in the dairy science department, she did her PhD on mass nutrient balance, where you're looking at all of the inputs coming onto the farm, feed, fertilizer, bedding, if you buy cows, everything is broken down into nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then you look at the exports, milk, beef, if you export manure, if you sell crops, that's all measured the same way. And then what we have left is that mass nutrient balance. What stays on the farm, what's going on to the fields as fertilizer. We were one of the first farms in the country to drop our phosphorus input by over 30% on our farm. One of the nutrients that everybody thought you've got to have a lot of in order to have a successful reproduction program in your dairy herd. But we were challenged on a lot of things, and that was one of them. And what a lot of people don't understand is that 85% of the phosphorus comes onto your farm in feed, not fertilizer. Only 15% comes on in fertilizer. So by being able to go to precision feeding and minimizing these kinds of inputs, and also at the same time we changed our cropping program. We're a valley farm. We have the rich bottomland in the valley, but we also have our share of hill soils. You can't buy a good valley farm without getting stuck with the hills too. And so, and the farms we would buy would have, ground that was being row cropped on these sensitive soils and on these hillsides. And by the way, I'm really jealous when I look at Laura and Chris's land. So we changed our entire cropping program and put permanent grasses on our hills, which has become a vital part of our feeding program. And so, so throughout all of this, being this case study farm, we were able to see a financial gain and a decrease in feed costs by doing the things that were also in the best interest of the environment.
That's great. Thank you all for sharing that. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask my last question in a bit of a lightning round mode here as we wrap up today. So we're on Facebook Live right now. We're talking, we're sharing this information with environmentally minded folks. We're sharing this information with farmers and the general public. So you have an opportunity here to leave one thing that you hope all of our watchers here today understand about dairy that they might not understand today. So if you have just kind of like a little kernel you want to leave today, what would you share with the audiences that's watching us? Start wherever on that one.
I guess I would just say that we depend on a healthy environment to have a successful business. And I don't know how better to say it. I said it in the video, it does us no good turn to abuse the environment because it's where we're making our living. So that would be my lightning answer.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great answer.
I would say that we're just like you. We're regular people with the same goals in mind, and we're working towards the same common goals of improving the future for the next generation. Whether you are recycling all your water bottles, or you're putting it in manure management, or you're using less single-use plastic or something, we all are working towards the same goal, and we're not that different from anyone else. So
and just to piggyback on that, we live, eat, breathe, drink the same things that you do. There's just this image of us just destroying the earth, and that why would we do that? It's we require the same things that you do to sustain life, and that's just an image that we need to continue to educate the public about, and just continue to reach out and let people know that we care. We don't just pillage the land for our causes. That there's no benefit to us in doing that.
We like clear water and clear air too.
Great. Katie?
Before you make more regulations and rules, please reach out to farmers and, obviously just work with us. Again, the Alliance is doing a fantastic job of doing that. I think our hope is for it to spread with other agencies to work with us before, sometimes I think some regulations are made without somebody stepping foot on a farm. because it just doesn't make sense. So, and I leave you with ask farmers, not Google. I mean, it all kind of goes together. So we're here to talk, to form relationships. We're not bad people, and we want the same thing you do. And thank you for having us.
That's great. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thanks to Ron and ADA Northeast for helping host this opportunity with us. Ron, you want to say anything before we conclude here?
I mean, like you said, Kate, thank you to our farmers. Thank you to the Alliance for letting us do this. I always learn something new when I talk to farmers, even though I've talked to some of these folks many times already. It's always a new experience for me, and I hope people attending today got something out of it.
I hope so as well. If you are attending, we're putting a link in the chat for you to take a survey to help inform feedback or to inform us about the educational value of this program today. We would really appreciate you taking that survey. We have a couple great giveaways as incentives to take that survey. So please click that link and give us some feedback today. We greatly appreciate it. I think we're also throwing some links in around our different websites for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, but also for ADA Northeast. And I just wanted to also invite you, if you are interested in learning more about the intersection of conservation and farming, that the Alliance hosts our annual Chesapeake Bay Watershed Forum every year. It'll be held November 4th and 5th in virtually this year. It's usually held in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, but we'll be holding it virtually this year. So I encourage you to join us if you'd like to learn more at that conference. So I just want to say thanks again to all of our farmers today, not just for joining us and sharing your thoughts and helping us understand how farmers are an essential part of the solution, but thank you for doing all the work that you do to keep us all fed and to keep our land in productive agriculture. We greatly appreciate that. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.